I'm Dave McLeod. I'm the CEO of Thoughtexchange, and I actually want to start with an acknowledgement because sort of 3/4 of the way through the year last year, this lovely person, Amelia, who's on this call, started really saying we really have to do a lot more virtual events. We have so many amazing leaders that we need to be speaking to. We really need to get in front of people and start having these conversations online. And so we said, oh, we'll try it. And Amelia was saying, let's try this out. And I had the privilege of speaking to people, both on stage and on these virtual events. And actually, it turns out the virtual events are extremely well attended and people are really appreciating them. And we're actually growing them a lot right now. And we're starting to put on a whole new thing. And now Amelia, who was on the marketing and sales team before, actually has a whole new role guiding our virtual events side of our organization as of January. So I just want to acknowledge you, Amelia, for this and providing the opportunity for people to be able to meet with someone like Suresh. So I am very pleased today to be joined by Suresh Radhakrishnan, who is here he's in the terribly cold and very challenging weather in Southern California right now. I had the pleasure of being on stage with Suresh recently in San Diego, in Carlsbad actually, and speaking about empowering management teams with Thoughtexchange. Suresh joined us in the summer and has done some really interesting work inside of Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. I'm going to do a quick apologize for not sharing the whole screen, but Suresh, I'm just going to read this slide because I think it's important. He's 29 years of experience, progressive and comprehensive experience in providing consultation and support to managers and executives for business planning, workforce management, team building, performance coaching, supervisor development. And Suresh was just sharing with us how his role is again expanding in Metro Water. He's an organizational development training function, human resources group at Metro Water. And I think more so, I also want to introduce Suresh as an extremely thoughtful human being that also is a really great example of trying to find the voice of people in an organization. He's not working in a startup that has a very flashy, culture that everyone's very open, and he's working in a very traditional organization, and he's working really hard to make sure that people have voice and make sure he brings that into his work. So Suresh, thank you very much for joining us today. I want to actually pass it over to you to maybe do a quick introduction of yourself to the group that's joined us here today, and maybe describe what it is that you do at Metropolitan Water and how it came to be that we're doing this leadership discussion with you.
Great, thank you, Dave. That's a tall introduction to try to fill those shoes. Happy New Year to everyone. I currently manage organization development and training, as well as the recruitment and staffing function, and also benefits and total compensation. The Metropolitan Water District provides water for 19 million people in Southern California. We're a wholesale provider of water. I believe we're the largest municipally owned water utility. And I've been in the water business now for 29 years in the training and development function, but also done a lot of other pieces of HR over the years. And very happy to be here with you today.
That's fantastic. So let's go back to, so in the summertime you met up with us and learned about Thoughtexchange, and you told us a great story that was really compelled us to something that we felt needed to be shared, because we're talking about management empowerment. And at Thoughtexchange, we do a lot of thinking and talking about voice and the voice of people and what empowerment really means. And so I'd like you to tell the story of, I know it's also important to Metropolitan Water, there's a story about talking about empowerment, but then listening about empowerment. So maybe you could just tell people, well, you saw Thoughtexchange, but then actually what was going on in Metropolitan Water at that time, and maybe walk people through just the mechanics of the first conversation that you had with people, because I think it's a really interesting story.
Sure. Yeah, so Metropolitan Water District is, as you mentioned, a very kind of old organization. The average age was about 49, 50. People have been here for a long time. And in the last couple of years, we've had huge change. As you see everywhere else, baby boomers retiring, and we had a whole new set of managers coming into, our COO changed, our chief administrative officer changed. We had a new CTO. Our CFO was just retiring. So there was a whole bunch of change going on. And there was talk with the new management coming in, executives talking about the things that they wanted to focus on. And our COO was famous for going around and talking about how he believed in employee recognition, empowerment, innovation. And some of the feedback we were getting was nobody really could get their hands around what does empowerment really mean. We're kind of a bureaucratic organization. We have a lot of policies and procedures. We're highly political, so there are kind of rules to follow. And we do a management forum, as we call it, which is where we get all 250 of our managers together into a room for a full day and talk about the issues, kind of get the marching orders for the next year, that kind of thing. And right before this, about a month before this event was happening, I was at the CLO Exchange in Chicago and ran into Thoughtexchange. Like the idea of how you would gather information, and I thought it was something that we could use. And I came back and talked to our executive management as well as my bosses about how we might be able to use Thoughtexchange to actually get people's input into what they thought they wanted to hear from the managers. At the manager forum, typically the general manager would get up and give his talk about where he saw things were going, State of the Union kind of thing, and then the other executives would as well. And we knew that empowerment was one of the big themes. And we knew there were a lot of things people had questions about in terms of what exactly does empowerment mean? How does that practically work? And in using, first of all, I feel that our managers, actually executives, empowered me and my team to bring in something that's a new technology that we were not very familiar with. And like you said, we're not one of those flashy Silicon Valley companies. We're kind of tried and true. And to take the chance on using a technology that we didn't know enough about. And I have to tell you, the support we got from Kevin and Amy on the Thoughtexchange team was tremendous. Within a matter of about 3 weeks, we set up Thoughtexchanges. We actually polled our managers ahead of time to find out what they wanted to hear from the general manager. Some of them were very hard-hitting questions that otherwise people wouldn't have spoken up and asked. And then the agreement was that in the forum, we would actually share what the other people's thoughts were and then try to answer some of them. And in the management forum, our executives, including my boss, Diane Pittman, actually addressed a lot of those issues that came up, which in a way was really empowering our managers to say, if you have thoughts and ideas, you can bring it up, it'll be heard. Nobody's going to get hurt by it. There's anonymity. There's also strength in numbers because everybody gets to star the thoughts and let the managers know which thoughts they had a lot of energy around. So just the use of Thoughtexchange and the way we brought it about within a matter of about 3 weeks itself was an example of empowerment. And since then, we've had several examples of where we've used it and people feel much more comfortable and safe in bringing up issues they want to bring up.
That's great. I want to dive in on one of those things. So thanks for that setup. And I really want people also to be hearing the thing that's underneath there, which is there's an organization talking about empowerment, and I've been guilty of this as a CEO too, which is maybe inspirement, maybe being the different than empowerment. That speaking in front of people. There's a very interesting thing going on here. Very simple question. What should the CEO discuss when we all get everybody together? What are the sort of things you'd like to hear from the senior leadership team and the senior management? It seems like a very, very simple question. Maybe Suresh, as far as you're comfortable with, maybe share what are the sort of, what are some of the harder things? Because you heard a lot of things come up, and some things where, I like to talk about some practical things, but then there were some issues where you had to be a leader. I like talking about how leaders need to actually be willing to be open and actually have some vulnerability to earn trust from people. And it seems like there was a really great trust building moment there where your leaders were actually able to lean into some topics. So if you wouldn't mind, maybe you could speak about a few of those things and how they impacted people.
Yeah, so some of the questions that came up, Dave, was around when you talk about empowerment, what does that exactly mean on a practical basis, on a day-to-day basis? If every memo that a manager writes has to be reviewed by 3 or 4 levels, if every hiring decision has to be reviewed by multiple levels, the kind of things, the purchasing decisions that have to go to so many different, making people jump through so many different hoops when they're maybe simple. Maybe there's a manager at the front line who really knows what is needed and should feel empowered to make the decision and go ahead and do it instead. And we are, of course, constrained by some government requirements and what are called the Brown laws in California. So there were some things where it has to go to different levels, but managers actually came out and asked questions about very specific things about how many people need to review something before it is ready to go out. And the executives being able to stand up there and articulate where they felt people should be allowed to make decisions was a good move. There were a lot of questions around, so we've been talking a lot about telecommuting. The younger generation coming in wants a much more flexible work schedule. And how can we make that happen? What does telecommuting actually mean in practical terms? Can everybody have it, or should it only be for people where it makes business sense? So having those discussions, having those questions called out so that it was out in the open and everybody was talking about it, made a big difference.
I love that. I love the simplicity of that story, but also just that there's a lot of ways that organizations are being transformed with digital technologies, and I love the application when it actually humanizes conversations ever more. Maybe you can actually, I'm privy to a few of your different uses. I know that then after this, you actually had a team of about 40 people, and you wanted to chat with them and also get their feedback. And there's a similar theme. It's a little bit different. Maybe you want to talk about with your HR managers, what did you ask there? And maybe just describe that process of empowering them to share their voice into that.
Yeah, so we were very excited about how successful the Thoughtexchange sessions were at the Management Forum. And shortly after that, we had a group meeting of HR. There were about 40 people in the room. And my boss, Diane Pittman, actually was looking at ways of how can we energize these folks and kind of get what's on their mind and thoughts about things that we can do differently. So we actually ran a thought exchange with those 40 people. One, to kind of introduce them to Thoughtexchange and let them see what the managers went through, but also to use it as an opportunity to gather some information about what kind of things, and the question we posed was, what kind of things can human resources do to provide better service to our customers? And, HR runs the whole gamut of all the different HR functions. And people who otherwise would not have spoken up in a bigger forum like that actually came up with wonderful ideas about things that we could do, some that were very simple and practical, others that need a little more research and looking into. But it's a very good exercise in hearing from, and again, we don't know exactly who said what, but we can kind of guess. But extremely good thoughts came up, and other people who never would have been thinking about those ideas actually got to go in and star it. And when the conversation happened, had opinions and things to say about some of those because they felt safe that it was not necessarily their own idea, but there were other people who were thinking the same thing. So we generated, within a matter of 15 minutes, I think we generated about 50 or 60 ideas, out of which I would say at least 10 or 20 are immediately actionable. And it was a great experience for us.
That's great. I like that story too, because the thing that Suresh, I think that is important for people to understand is that there's a bit of a vulnerability curve that I like to talk about, is that there's more value the more vulnerable you have conversations with. And as at the very end, you can ask a question to say, hey, where should we go for lunch? You could, there's some vulnerability, at least you're not saying we're going for lunch here, but there's almost no value in that. But then when you're saying, hey, the general manager is going to be here, what would you like them to talk about? And they're really going to talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. There's a bit more vulnerability there, and there's a bit more value, because it's like, well, I really get that you're talking about what I want to talk about. Yeah. There's a third application I'd like you to dig into around your management academy, because again, I think there's a real interesting connection between vulnerability and giving voice to people, because there is a bit of I think a new leader paradigm is that we're trying to find ways to just not measure people, but actually access their voice. But then you have but then what happens? Because Now I have to listen, and now I have to open up my heart and my mind and be vulnerable and actually be willing to listen. And so now you have this management academy. Maybe you can quickly describe to people what that means, a management academy. And a very simple question there. You'll notice all the questions are extremely simple, yet they create a bit of vulnerability and trust between, because you're responding to them in such an open way. So maybe describe that academy piece for folks.
Yeah, and if we can touch on the vulnerability part, with our HR team, we started out by asking them what kind of dessert they wanted or what kind of menu they wanted for their Christmas party.
Right.
And that made it easier for people to say, oh, I want carrot cake, I'd like filet mignon, but it just kind of got people used to the idea of how simple it is and how we could use it, and that kind of helped. So lightening things up a little bit sometimes kind of helps you delve into the more important, deeper questions. Our management academy is something we set up a few years ago as we realized that we're going to have a lot of people retiring, especially managers, that we wanted to develop a pool of people who were ready and able and willing to move into management roles. So in the Management Academy, we actually have about cohorts of 25 to 30 people at a time. And we bring in a panel of middle and senior level managers, actually even frontline managers, to come in and answer questions that the group might have about, if I'm a manager, what are some of the things that I need to be looking out for? Many questions tend to be sensitive. They don't want to ask it in a group setting. We kind of knew that. So what we did was we asked the group of about 25 people in this cohort. The other part today was that, talking about empowerment, I wanted to empower my team to use it more, because I didn't need to be the only person knowing how to use Thoughtexchange. So my staff actually was trained by Amy Pohl on your staff to actually use Thoughtexchange. She actually showed up here after our Carlsbad meeting and spent about an hour and a half maybe, and trained us so well that everybody in my team felt confident that they could run a Thoughtexchange. And then Eric Bachman on my team, actually, who runs the Management Academy, put together a question to ask the participants in that cohort, what would you like to hear from these frontline managers and middle managers? And they actually came up with a set of wonderful questions that we actually posed to the managers in the room, and they were able to respond to it. Again, given that we got 40 or 50 questions in a matter of 15 minutes, we were only able to address about 15 or 20 of them. And the beauty of Thoughtexchange is that you could take the questions that were not answered and have answers written up and mailed back out to everybody who participated. So nothing that anybody brought up was left on the table. The ones we could answer face-to-face we did, and then we did a follow-up where we sent answers to the other questions that they asked, so that everybody's points were heard and they felt like they got an answer to some of the things. And now what's interesting is that some of the people who are in the team have gone back to their units, talked about it, and recently our IT folks, about 120 of them, are having a all-hands meeting and have asked Eric to run a Thoughtexchange for them for their whole big group when they have their meeting at the end of the month. So more people are hearing about it. They like the idea that it's anonymous and safe. They like the idea that we follow through with it, and they get other people to chime in and star it. So there's support for their questions or issues that they're bringing up. And so we're actually starting to use it for even other groups. So, and I think the beauty of Thoughtexchange is that it's so easy to set up and run, and that you can do it for a group of 15 as you can for a group of 250.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Suresh. And so as a part of, if this is your first leader discussion live on virtual event, what you're going to find out is that we're trying to walk our talk here. And so the way we do that is I wanted to give you kind of an intro to the sort of things Suresh, working in an organization like Metropolitan Water, it actually takes a lot of vulnerability and a lot of trust to actually bring in a new solution, and then to bring it out, and then to empower team members. There's a lot of interesting things there that I think seem disarmingly simple, but actually put to use, it's actually a very strong message of trust to say, what are the sort of questions you'd like me, your boss, to cover? What are the sort of things that we should be doing? As your leader, I want to know from you. I don't want to send you a survey, say, here's 3 ideas, which one do you like best? I want to hear your voice. What I want to do right now is, with everybody on the call, we're going to put a link in, and I'd like to ask you to go ahead and participate in this exchange right now, and share any sort of thoughts or questions you have for Suresh, well, we have his generous time right now. As far as you can ask anything you want, and we're going to vulnerably show whatever comes up to the top. And then also, I want to point out that just like in a face-to-face meeting, when you say, hey, any questions? And then you get the one person who always asks questions. Online, it's like 1,000 times worse. You say, anyone has a question, and one person goes into the question and answer chat, and you get really scared because you don't know what the heck they're going to ask. What we're going to do right now is, I'd like everybody here to go ahead and share at least a thought or two, and we're going to spend about 8 minutes doing this. So I'd appreciate you to take that link. It's put into the chat there of the Zoom webinar meeting. You click on the link. You don't need to sign up, so you can just continue past that. Don't worry about the email sign up, etc. Go in and share 1 or 2 thoughts or questions you have for Suresh, and then rate. Let's have a goal of rating, say 15. 15, if you can rate 30, fantastic, but rate 15 thoughts based on how much you agree that you'd like to have Suresh cover this during our time together. At the end of that, we're going to do our best to respond to as many of those as we can. There's phone-in listeners as well happening, and so I'm going to explain one other thing, is that as a self-described extrovert, I effectively am uncomfortable in silence. So I can remember years ago with our own company, I would launch an exchange, and I literally did this. This is not a word of a lie. I launched an exchange and everybody in the company was sharing their thoughts, and I was like, I need to put music on or something. It's too quiet in this room. So I put music on, and of course we're a software company with a lot of engineers, and I would either want to talk through the silence or I'd want to put music on. So I put music on to set everybody at ease, which is just completely biased and stupid and wrong. And everyone would you please A, shut up, B, turn the music off so I can just think for a while. And so that's what I'm going to do. Those of you that are on the phone, at 10:30, we're going to be launching back in. And those of you that are on, please share some thoughts. I'm going to show a visualization here in a minute of the thoughts that are coming up to the top. So you're able to see the conversation that's actually happening. So I'm going to do my best to be quiet here for the next 5 or 6 minutes where you share your thoughts and rate 15 or 20. Okay, I'm going to resume my share here as people, I'm not going to quite close it off yet and let people just do the last few links. I also want to show you, there's nobody that's seen this yet. It's kind of exciting. I want to show you that this is a new visualization that we have actually, where the thoughts near the middle here have similarly high ratings about some actionable items as a result of the exchange. There's some outlier thoughts here that not necessarily everyone wants to talk about. You can actually see the outliers, which is pretty cool. And as you go through and rate your final thoughts here, I'm going to bring it over to show you just what's coming up. But I can't help but also, for those of you that like data visualizations, also just want to show you this new cool thing, which is doing auto theming at the same time and actually showing the thoughts that are together on this, within each of these themes of culture shifts and the timing, etc. This is something that it's internal only, but I like to somehow give a quick glimpse of the future of what's coming down the Thoughtexchange pipeline to be able to show agreement visualized in themes. Anyhow, let's go back to the quick results here. You can see, here's what's coming up to the top. What are some actionable items that came as a result of Thoughtexchange? And how often are you doing these right now? Suresh, maybe you can speak to some of those actionable pieces. I think people would love to hear you discuss a few of those things, certainly a few different thoughts in that area. So what are some actionable items you can speak to, Suresh?
So the questions that came up about empowerment has actually generated some discussion about exactly what our current policies and procedures are. So the senior management team, the executive management team, has actually been looking at specific directives or clarity that they can give to some of the questions about how many levels of review are required for different areas. So that's something that's in the works. The discussion that it generated about, the questions rather, that were generated about telecommunication got a lot of managers talking about whether or not we need a policy around telecommuting, or do we need to leave it, empower the managers themselves to figure out what might best work in their areas. At least it's brought that thinking out in the open and people are actually talking about it. Some people are actually already feeling empowered to take on and do some things that are innovative and creative in the way that work gets done. As far as how often do we have the management forum, typically happen once a year. But as I was mentioning, there are individual functions that have called us and said, hey, we'd like to run a thought exchange for our team to look into things. Some of them are even considering using it with some of their vendors or contractors to sit and discuss issues around projects. We're a huge engineering organization. So they're interested in using that for other areas. We have a mentoring program that is kicking off, and we're definitely thinking that there might be some opportunities there for the mentors to hear what might be some of the concerns on the mentees' minds that they might need to address as they go through any length of a mentoring period.
That's great. So I think it's really important, Suresh. I think that's a great, and those of you that haven't experienced Thought Exchange, is the actionability. Sometimes there's things that are just, we're considering it. Sometimes there's very specific things you can do depending on the nature of the question that you ask. If you ask what questions you need to answer in an event, that's actually action in itself, is actually responding. The next one is interesting. Now you're only 6 months in, I don't know how many exchanges you've run, or 5 or 6 or something like that since you've started up.
Correct.
Let's talk about the culture shift. You said something interesting in the start that I hadn't heard you say before, which is actually the fact that you were empowered to do this was empowering in and of itself. The empowerment actually started ahead of our involvement. We're a tool for you. But maybe you want to talk about some of the cultural shift, because I think that's what people are really here to. It says we're asking this because the topics of engagement and empowerment being heard is really important where employees are working. So have you seen any cultural shifts start to happen, or maybe you can speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it also touches on the vulnerability issue, Dave, is that there was a lot of concern. I mean, I really have to give credit to our executive management and my boss for seeing an idea and saying, okay, we're 3 weeks away from this event. If you think this is going to work, let's give it a shot. Because if it didn't work, obviously that's going to make us look very bad. Fortunately, it did. Thoughtexchange has done their homework. But just the fact that we used a completely different tool and encourage people to be vulnerable, and definitely for the managers, whatever questions they put up was going to show up. And for the general manager and the chief executives, whether or not they're ready and willing to answer those questions. And the way we did that was to say, the ones that we can answer, let's do that now. The ones that we cannot, we'll follow up later. So we actually sent up a follow-up email to all the participants, telling them, showing them all the different questions that came up and promising them that we were going to address those, and that over a period of time, we would get to hopefully all of them. So the change in the culture is that the shift is that nothing is now unspeakable anymore. People feel that if we don't talk about it now, it eventually might come up somewhere because somebody is going to talk about it. And if we're running thought exchanges, it's going to show up. And our CTO is a good example of someone who kind of said, I don't know, he's relatively new here. If they ask me for things that I cannot deliver, I don't want to create that expectation. But once he got a chance to see it and sleep on it for a few months, he said, you know what? I think I'm ready to ask my team what they want. The only thing is he wants to do it ahead of the actual meeting, so not do it live. We'll send out the questions, get the response from the participants, and then they'll have about a week to prepare the answers so they're not coming in blindsided by questions. They'll be able to answer the ones that they can answer more concretely, and then commit to what they're going to do with the rest of them.
I think that's great. And I think that you're speaking to something that I've learned is really important too, is meeting people where they're at from a level of vulnerability, but also from where they're at. We have people in our company that they want to send an exchange a few days prior because they want to be very prepared, not because they don't want to be vulnerable, but actually they want to give enough time to give thoughtful answers and actually not be speaking off the cuff. Where other people actually want to stand in vulnerability and say, I'm willing to speak like we're doing right now. Anything you ask us, we're willing to answer for you. But my suggestion there is that it's really important, and I'm seeing you do this, is meeting people where they're at is okay. You don't say, no, you must use it live.
Yes.
Or you can ask.
And you really have to give credit to the top management that is willing to be that vulnerable and saying, okay, if they want to bring those up, let them bring it up. We'll figure out a way to address it. And we might not have answers to everything that you ask, but we're at least going to listen to you and start thinking about it.
That's fantastic. Did you have, I like this, we went through the changes again, but did you have leaders question the vulnerability? I mean, we talked about how they empowered you to do this. Was there a flip side to this? Do you have people saying, Suresh, you're crazy. What are you doing? What are you bringing in? Or not? Like maybe speak, I'm not sure. Speak to that.
Oh, no, yeah, we definitely had managers come up and say, listen, man, if you put this out there, people are going to say things, and then are we ready for that? And, you know, part of the response to that is they're already thinking it anyway, and they're definitely talking about it at the water cooler and the lunch table. Why not make it open so we can all address it and deal with it rather than say, you know, everybody's talking about it and pretending like it's not happening. Let's just put it out on the table and see what we can do about it, and be realistic about it and say, well, we might not be able to take action on everything, but the ones that we can, we will. And then the other ones will figure out a way to address it, or in some cases having to say, nope, can't do that, and that's the end of the discussion there. It's not going to come up for a while. So they're not sitting around wondering because they now have a firm answer.
That's great. And you said something really important in there that, that I hear from leaders all over the place, but it's usually a very important aspect when you bring this to people. They say, well, what asking the question will cause people to have a conversation? And the answer is actually, no, they're having the conversation already. We just want to be part of it. We just like to know what they're actually talking about, what they're thinking, versus, am I starting a conversation that is, if I ask them, hey, what do you want to talk about? Are people suddenly going to say, I don't know if I know what empowerment means? Are you the one that caused them to not know what empowerment means? Or are you now just part of the conversation that is, you're privy to it? And so I think,
the downside was at the Christmas party, we had a smorgasbord of desserts because now everybody knew what everybody liked and people wanted to bring things in. So we gained 5 pounds probably on that one day.
That's great. I think I know the answer to this, but I don't think you have used this yet for strategic planning. Maybe I'm pretty sure I know that's a no, but maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, not directly used it for strategic planning, but many of the thoughts that came up lend itself to going back to the drawing board and thinking about what are the kind of things that we need to be focusing on. We have huge projects coming up. We have a $20 billion project that's going to run for many number of years, and people ask questions about it. And as we prepare, our fiscal year starts in July 1. So as we prepare for our next year's goals, there are a number of ideas and thoughts and questions that came up that give us, kind of pause to look at which of these should we be incorporating into our plan as we go into the future. So I think it will definitely help us in our strategic planning as we move forward, but we definitely wasn't part of what we were thinking about immediately.
That's great. I think something that's important for me around this topic too is that I think strategic planning, being involved in strategic planning is one thing, being involved in the embodiment of the purpose of strategic planning is another. So that's what I hear is that in the strategic plan, obviously empowerment is important. And now people are involved in actually how you're doing that, as opposed to talking about what the words are, which I think is really important too. I really liked that distinction of the difference between embodying and actually making, what are you doing in your strategic planning versus how are you doing the planning itself.
Correct.
I want to get into this next one. Sorry, I scrolled. What are you learning as a leader as you're deepening and expanding collaborative process? That's a fantastic question.
That's a great question. I think the big learning is that there are a lot of people out there with a lot of wonderful ideas who kind of feel like they're never being heard or have never been asked. And as soon as you give them an opportunity and you open the tap, you see this profuse amount of data coming in, information coming in, ideas coming in. And for the managers, sometimes they're thinking some of these things but haven't articulated it because they don't know whether it's going to sell, whether people are going to buy into it. And now they have a good idea. And I think the big learning for many of the managers is, in fact, in our Management Academy, one of the managers who was on the panel said, gee, I wish I had a tool like this when I started working, because that's a question that I would have liked to have answered before I started, so that I wouldn't make the mistakes I made, in the early years of my management career. So there are questions coming up that people were thinking and sitting on, but never articulated because they didn't have a mechanism to bring it up. And then Thoughtexchange provides you that tool to surface a lot of that. So that's been huge, that there's a lot of good ideas out there. I think we've always known that, but the fact that it's actually out there and everybody can see it and talk about it, and it's safe.
That's great. We have time for just a few more. And so I want to go to this. Sounds like there's conversations happening around the approval process. I imagine in a large organization, it's that it hasn't changed overnight, but I'm sort of curious, have you heard some feedback from people around the fact that your senior managers are acknowledging the approval process? And do you feel that it's increasing employee satisfaction, et cetera?
Yeah, I think the senior management gets the gravity of how big an issue that is, that how much of a pain point that is, that people are frustrated with that part, and that we really need to do something about it. We had over the years been working on cutting that in many ways, but I think we definitely recognize that the tools we have available to make purchases, the things that you can find on the internet, there's a lot of other ways that you can buy things and do things without having to go through the same hoops. So I think that's definitely making a difference. It also gives managers an opportunity to talk about, if you want to be empowered to do those things, then here are my expectations about how you would do that. So it's not just carte blanche empowering everybody, but giving them empowerment with some real clear guidelines about the things that they can be making decisions about and how it should look when it comes out. So that has been a very good a piece of recognizing that.
Thank you, Suresh. I think, and this is great, I think the, let's talk about, I'm going to sort of blend these couple last things here, which is like, let's talk about what are your plans next? Because I know that you've actually used it in small groups and in larger groups, and we have our smallest groups being like 20. Our largest groups are actually like 20,000, and Metropolitan Water has been 250. But I'm curious, what are your plans about doing this? And because it's related to the next question too, like what's the timing? I think there's something really interested in this thought, like what is the timing for using the solution? Because it says for employee engagement, HR strategy is to survey people when they're feeling their best, because of course you want to have the best result. This is something different, isn't it? It's actually asking people. So I'm going to build that into some sort of question that hopefully makes sense.
Yeah.
What is the uses that you have planned, and how does it differentiate from an employee engagement survey that you would ask when people are feeling great, so you hopefully get a great answer?
Yeah, so my ODN training team is definitely very excited about this tool. We are actually, we would do team building sessions, we do offsites with different groups, sometimes smaller groups, sometimes cross-functional groups. So in many of those interventions, we find this to be a very useful tool. We are very excited about the ease of setting it up and running it. The fact that you could actually start new questions while you're in the session. It doesn't always have to be completely pre-planned. You can actually run it there, and people have their smartphones or their laptops with them, and they can go in and start asking questions, providing input. So we're very excited about the fact that we get to use it in a lot of those interventions. A lot of our managers are considering that when they have their all-hands meetings or when they have meetings with vendors or brainstorming ideas for innovative things that they want to do, that they could actually use Thoughtexchange. So the ease of use and setup and the limited training that's required for anybody to run it, we think that we're going to have a lot more use out of it as we go forward. And the second question, Dave, I kind of missed that. What was the second part was?
Actually, I'm going to have you tied up on this because I think thank you very much for all of your kind comments about Thoughtexchange. And I also, the thing I want to acknowledge you for is that as a leader, you brought in a fairly vulnerable thing. And I think there's a lot of people here scratching their heads saying, well, how did you get people on board with this? You have these ideas, you're building it. How did you get this internal buy-in to use this tool that requires leadership vulnerability? I love the final comment here that is empowering the workforce is easier said than done. So I think, can you maybe tell, like, how did you work that to actually bring in something that requires vulnerability into an organization?
Yeah, so it's not something that happened, just when we found out about Thoughtexchange. I think as an organization, you have to have kind of till the field for a while to get to the point where when you bring in new ideas. You know, over the years, we've brought in Skillsoft back when it was Mind Leaders or Degreed and, you know, online tools and such, that where we kind of started to recognize that, you know, technology is the way of the future. There are a lot of creative ways that you can use technology. We've used some other polling tools, but there you actually had to pre-set the answers. But here was an opportunity where any thought could be brought up. People could put in whatever it was in their own words. So having managers who support you, managers who are willing to stick their neck out and take a chance on some ideas that you bring in. Having had a little bit of a track record of doing things well and training kind of helped, I think. Having a wonderful team that I work with that, you know, usually are brave enough to ask questions and shoot holes in things that I would bring up if they didn't think it was appropriate. All of those things helped. So it was not like it just happened on, you know, August 17th when I met Thoughtexchange, everything changed. We had actually tilled the ground for quite a while over the years, and had managers moving into these roles where they were willing to take a chance and try new things, and recognizing that technology is part of the way of the future and we can use it to our advantage.
Thank you, Suresh. That is a fantastic way to wrap up this conversation. And so I'm going to leave with two things. One, I'm going to give this is a very interesting aspect of our tool that I think it's hilarious when I saw this, so I have to show this, which is that this is finding common ground in between people. So there's a group of people that desperately need to know why there's a piece of orange behind me that is not a piece of art. And there's another group of people that really don't care and don't want to talk about that. But there's common ground in between you that Suresh just was able to talk to, which means that these are actually sound dampeners. That's art on this side, but it didn't make enough sound dampening, just for the four of you that found that to be an incredibly important thing to understand. But I want to end on the fact that the common ground was, I think you really talked about the changes that you were able to drive in the leadership. And I think you said the most important thing there at the end, which is that you did a lot of work to till the ground and actually build trust in your organization. And that we are just very happy, just in this conversation, to be partnering with you in this. And I hope those of you that attend this session to hear from Suresh, I hope you picked up some insight, but I think maybe the core one there was at the very end, which is that it's a lot of work. It's a career of work to be able to open up an organization and create more leadership vulnerability and allow people to feel empowered. It's not overnight, but there's little things and you have to celebrate those things along the way. So thank you, Suresh, for joining us.
If I can add just one more thing, I think I really want to recognize and comment your team on the support that you gave us, from Amy to Amelia to Kevin. I'm probably forgetting a couple of names here, but the support that you gave us to make it easy for us to use it is a big part of what made it successful as well. So kudos to your team over there at Thoughtexchange. I
appreciate you saying that, Suresh. Very much so. And we're going to actually take a few more of these questions, and we'll send these responses back out to you afterwards. Thank you very much for everyone who attended today for attending. We'll send a wrap-up report of this, and please look for other Leadership Live conversations. There's a quick survey that comes out after this to be able to see how satisfied you were with it in general. And yes, there will be a recording of this session that we'll be able to share out if you came out right at the very end. So thank you very much for joining. And
Photoshop and make me look like Tom Hanks.
You already look like Tom Hanks. You're better looking than Tom Hanks, Suresh.
Thank you, Dave. Enjoyed it. Happy New Year. All the best in 2019 to everyone who is participating.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Goodbye and have a great day.